Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to start our intro to CSS. This is week 1, day 2 of Web Fundamentals. So let's learn about CSS. Yesterday, we learned about HTML. We learned about different tags that we could use to show information on our page, in headers, in links, in paragraph tags, in tables. We also learned how to make form input so that we can receive information. We also need to style our page. So that's what CSS is about. Can anyone tell me what CSS stands for?
Cross-site styling, I believe.
Cascades style setting.
Cascading style sheets. Very close.
Sheets.
Cascading style sheets. Can anyone tell me what the word cascading means off the top of their head if they're a living dictionary? What is cascade?
A certain design for the website.
Cascading means to fall from top to bottom. To fall from top to bottom. So we'll see how that comes into play in just a moment. Let's go over like a broad definition of CSS to see what CSS is about. All right, so I've created this slide. Let's take a look at it. So let's look at CSS. What we're going to use CSS for is for styling. So we're going to become artists in a sense. We're going to be able to pick colors, designs, and use them to build our website. So let's take a look. It's used to style HTML. If the HTML is the skeleton, CSS is the skin and clothes, right? So we're going to have to give it some appeal, visual appeal to our website. Otherwise, it's not going to get much traction. Not many people are going to want to stay, right? So HTML is the bare bones. CSS is going to give it that look. And then when we finish with CSS, we're going to give it some JavaScript. It's going to give it some life. All right, so let's look at some examples of what we can do with CSS. We can change the background color of an area. We can change the font style of the text. We can change the font height. We can change the font color. We can make a section, like a square section round. We can make images, backgrounds of certain sections of our pages. We can size and arrange the divs that we learned about divs yesterday on our page. So we're going to be able to size and arrange these divs on our page where we would like them. And so that's going to be a lot of what we're going to be doing in CSS. Diagramming pages, cutting them up, chopping them up into areas, and then using CSS to make those divs look like the blueprint that we're trying to do. And so with CSS, we can make a simple website look something like this, right? This would be changing just the background color, setting a certain area to be an image. The search bar, we're rounding it out the corners, and we're making a button inside. This is all just fonts and images and displaying of divs in certain areas. Nothing but CSS and HTML here. I mean, maybe there's some JavaScript at play, but we don't see it. We're just seeing a website, right? So just HTML and CSS, we can make websites look like this. So this is what CSS will look like. This is a snippet of it. All right. So we'll be grabbing certain sections of our HTML and putting rules in as such. All right. So this is just a screenshot, So we'll be building lots of CSS in just an hour, a few hours. So let's look at how to connect the CSS to the HTML file. First, we need to create a file called style.css. We'll do that together in just a moment. All right, and then we have to link the CSS file in the head of our HTML file. All right, so that's where the connection happens. In the head of the HTML files where we will link the CSS. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. All right, once we have it connected, once we have it linked, there's different types of selectors that we're going to be able to use. Once that connection between the CSS and HTML file is made, we're going to want to grab different elements. Remember, the elements are what are created by the tags. Once the tags are used on our HTML page, then it's an HTML element that's existing on our page. We're going to be able to grab those elements by IDs. We'll show you what IDs are, what classes are. We'll figure out what classes are today, and this will note the difference between the two as well. What's the difference between a class and an ID? And what's an element selector? Do we need a class or ID at all? So an element selector just grabs the element without needing a class or ID. We have the star selector, and then we have pseudo classes. We won't go over pseudo classes. We'll just go up to the star selector in this course. All right, and so the CSS rules that we apply, we're targeting certain areas in our HTML, and then we're giving specific rules, okay? So that's what we're doing. We're grabbing certain elements in our HTML page on that skeleton, and we're setting specific rules to those elements. Either changing font size or changing the size of the square that the text lives in. Okay, and lastly, we can use CSS to arrange divs on our page. I've mentioned this several times. So we'll be able to add a pixel size to our divs. All right, we'll start. There's lots of different measurements that we can use. We'll start with pixels. Okay, and we'll learn also in the next couple days. Well, today we'll learn about inline block. All right, that will act like training wheels for getting our divs in a certain line. Tomorrow, we're going to pivot from inline block to flex. We're going to teach you a better way than inline block tomorrow. But in order to get you to appreciate flex and understand it better, we're going to work with inline block today. Okay, so we're going to have you work with a certain way of styling. You can keep this way of styling, but there's a better way that we want to teach you tomorrow. Okay, so flex is going to be what we focus on tomorrow. All right, and that's our brief introduction to CSS. Let's look at the platform. So right now I'm on week 1, day 2. I don't think you guys see that, but here, if you go to setting up projects under web development, above the box model section, I'm going to be going through this on the Learn platform in order to do today's lesson. Okay, so before I transition, anyone have any questions so far about CSS? I'm sure there's plenty, but if you have any good question right now is a good time to ask. I'm going to start to build some CSS in just a moment. Okay, all right, let's get started. So cascading style sheets. Let's create our first CSS file, and then I'll show us why it's called cascading style sheets. All right, so here I have a folder ready for us. And by the way, guys, the code is available on GitHub now. So any code that I use during the lecture, I'm pushing it to GitHub. You guys can see here, I have it saved by day and week. So you can see the lectures for yesterday here and the code for yesterday's lecture here. And so I'll have this available later on today. So we can all watch the video and then also download the code to see how the code works on our own machine. Okay, so let's build our CSS file. The way we're going to do this, let's first create a HTML file. We need that to start with. So we'll say index.html. That's going to be our HTML file name. And then I say exclamation mark, enter. That's going to give me the boilerplate. And here in my body, I can write hello world. Now, if I save this, and then if I open with live server, I should be able to see my hello world. So this is brightly created. This is the first thing I want to test before I move any further. And so that has started. So now I have my hello world. Now I want to create my CSS file. Okay. And as you can see in the platform here, the folder, the index.html file and CSS file, they're in the same folder. So all I need to do is to go where I already was here. So in this folder, I just need to click this button to create a new file, and I'll call it style.css. Style.css. And now I have created a blank CSS file. A blank CSS file is now there. And before I connect it, I want to show you guys something on Visual Studio. You can view multiple files at once by clicking this button here. It looks like a square with a line in the middle, like a book or something. So if you click this, it's a split editor to the right button. So now I just moved CSS to the right. I can close CSS on the left, and now I have HTML on the left, CSS on the right. All right, you can do this in multiple ways. Like you can, for example, if I have CSS up, I can just click and drag it to this right side. I have to kind of feel for where it's going to drag to. So that's that. I can drag it to the bottom. So I can see index.html on the top half and style.css on the bottom. I like to have HTML on the left and CSS on the right. That's a easy way for me to read it, and I think it would be for you guys too. So let's work with this one. And so I have HTML on the left, CSS on the right. So how do we connect this? We need to connect our CSS to our HTML. And once we connect it, we need to test that connection, right? So first connect, then test that connection. So let's connect it. The way to connect the CSS file to the HTML is, well, first you have to create a little space for it. So let's indent in the head somewhere so that it can, that connection can be right here on line 6. I like to put it above the title. And I'll say link, L-I-N-K, colon, and do you see one of the options already there? CSS, link colon CSS. If I hit enter there, let's take a look at what just popped up. We have this link rel equals style sheet. That's what the purpose of the link is for. That's what telling us what this link is. And then we have an href linking to the file. So this is the connection to the file that we just created. If this connection here within the quotes, if this file is named differently, for example, if I have style1.css and this one is just style CSS, there's not going to be a connection. It has to be the exact same spelling of the file name. Okay, so that's why I named my CSS file style.css, because the default link here, if I just type in link colon CSS and enter, and it gives me this tag, this link tag, I don't have to remember to, write the tag out by hand. Link rel style sheet href style.css. I just have to type in link colon CSS and then enter. Now my CSS file is connected to my HTML file. All right, so I want to take a pause now and ask you guys, oh, I still didn't delete that second. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, guys. Second question is still there. Meaningless question. All right, so I'll get that fixed later. But looks like we're all understanding. Perfect. So that's how we link a CSS file. Now we need to test that connection. We need to test that connection and make sure it's properly linked. That's the reason we connected it, to use it. So we need to test it to see that it's usable. So how can we write some CSS in here and style our page to see that our connection is working? Let's take a look at the platform. All right. So here we see an example. Here's the link, style sheet, href, style.css. It's below the title here. but it's still in the head of the HTML. So that's an example of that. And so now we can add some CSS rules. So here's our first example of a couple of rules here for CSS. And it looks like it's targeting an H1. So let's create an H1. Let's wrap this hello world in an H1. So H1 hello world. Okay. So that should be there like this. Okay, there it is. So now I need to copy this and paste it in my CSS. And let's take a look at what this is doing. First thing I see here is color. And we have a color Rebecca purple. So there's inbuilt colors into CSS. There's colors inbuilt. You can name them by a common name. So for example, blue or red or pink. All right, it has plenty of colors. And you can see the list of all the colors available if you do colon after the word color. And then take a look at all the options here. Lots of different colors that you can choose from. All right, the one that we saw there already, I'll just stick with that, Rebecca purple. Okay, so this is here one of the rules that we will apply to our H1. The way that we are applying it to our H1 is through this selector. This is called a CSS selector. All right, this is a, if we look at our slide here, this is what's called the element selector. Okay, we are selecting the element on the page. We're not attaching anything to this element. There's nothing unique about this element. It's just an H1 tag with the words hello world in it. All right. And this one is selecting all the H1s on our HTML page. And we're setting the color to Rebecca purple. So let's see what this affects in just a minute. And the other thing that we're affecting is the font size. We're saying make the font size of the H1 on your page, of all the H1s on your page, 50 pixels. So let's look at this. And there we have our H1 with a different look. We did that by applying the CSS. And this is the element selector. So if we have another H1 on our page, this one is going to be, we're only supposed to have one at a time, but just for the sake of example, if we have another H1, and what should this one say? This one's going to say, good morning, happy Tuesday. Okay, we see this H1 has the exact same CSS rules applied, right? It's purple and it's 50 pixels large. We can change the pixel size. Let's change the pixel size a little bit. Let's change it to 70. All right, so that's 70 pixels. Let's take a look at what 30 pixels looks like. All right, that's 30. Let's change the color a little bit. Let's change it to light red. Oh, light golden rod yellow. How about that? Oh, that's not visible. That's not nice to look at. Sorry about that. Let's change it to pale violet red. Pale violet red. It's just pink. Okay, that's just pink to me. Sorry, I'm not very sophisticated. All right, so when we write our selectors and we write our rules, we also want to note that if we don't write CSS properly, the whole thing will break, right? So let's look at this, for example. Okay, right now, the only rule that is applied, I just commented out both lines of CSS. The way I did that was just by using that comment shortcut, Command slash or Control slash if you're on a PC. Whatever line you're on, if you do Command slash or Control slash, it will comment or uncomment, right? So I've just commented out both lines, and you'll see here, once I do that, the rule will turn on and off, right? So it's 30 pixels. And if I apply this color here, it breaks everything, right? So it's happy being 30 pixels. Let's change it to something more obvious. Let's change it to 80 pixels. Okay, it's 80 pixels right now. As soon as I apply this color back on, it breaks. It breaks. It's no longer 80 pixels. And the reason is CSS is very sensitive. So if you don't have the specifications here complete, and also with the semicolon, so let's also write a color in. So let's make it red. Okay, so it's recognizing that I want to make a color red, but unless I put a semicolon following the end of the rule here, it will break. And it won't just not color it red, but it won't apply the font size as well. All the surrounding rules will also break. So we need to add a semicolon at the end of each line, of each rule that we write. Okay, so let's take a poll. I want to make sure you guys are following me so far. How well do we understand that this selector here is an element selector grabbing every single H1 on our HTML page, and also how these rules are applied, how you have to have an open curly and closed curly bracket, and within you have the name, the rule here with divided by a colon, and it has to end with the semicolon. So let's give some feedback on how well we're getting this. I'm gonna make sure that we're all still with me here. Okay. So we have our element selector. So let's continue on through our platform. So color, we know then affects the color of the font. We know that the color affects the color of the font, And I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture that cascading style sheets, cascading meant falling from top to bottom. So I want to take a look at how that is applied. What does that mean? Cascading in relation to cascading style sheets. I'm going to write another H1 selector here. I'm going to say this H1, this one is going to follow the first one. There's going to be a difference though. I want the color to go back to Rebecca Purple and the font size to be 50 pixels instead of 80. And now you see that both of them, both the first and second H1, hello world and good morning, happy Tuesday. Those are my two H1s. Both of them are now purple and both of them are now 50 pixels. So who can tell me what they think just happened?
Is it running through the code and it sees one, registers, and then it registers the last one and stays with that?
Yes. So there is a hierarchy of who's taking priority, right? So the rule on the bottom is going to supersede the effect of the rule first applied on the H1 here. So this H1, it just like you said, it acknowledged it, but once it read this H1, now this H1, the value here is going to take priority. It's going to supersede this, override this one here.
Why is it going to supersede it?
Because that's the way that CSS is built. That's the cascading part. So
oh yeah, from top to bottom, right?
Right, so it's written from top to bottom, but everything on the bottom is going to take priority in rules. So if you see an H1 rule written above, the one below is going to take priority. So think of the name cascading in that sense. When it's falling, the rules are coming from top to bottom, and all the rules at the bottom are taking precedence.
All right.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right, so we need to be able to apply specific rules to specific elements on our HTML page, right? We don't want this effect. We don't want to struggle with this. What if we want our second H1 to be purple and the first one to be red? We're going to find out how to do that. So let's continue on here. So we can change the names of colors. And remember, color is going to affect the color of the font, and we can affect font size so far. Now we're going to just work with these couple rules, color and size, and apply some different selectors. We're going to apply some different selectors. Okay. Now, one more rule we'll introduce, one more thing. Text align center. Text align center. All right, so right now everything is justified to the left. I want this hello world to move to the center. So let's delete this one here. I want to go back to red. Let's make this 50 as well, 50 pixels. We don't need this second one either. So we just want this hello world to go to the center of the page. The way to do that is by saying text align center. And there we have it. It's centered in the center of its container. The container we're able to shrink right now, and it's going to remain in the center either way. All right, now for this upcoming weeks, we don't need to work or worry about making our web page adjust for all page sizes. We're going to save that for a lesson after you complete the test on that Friday of that test week. So Friday of next week, we'll work on adjusting our page to adjust to different window sizes. But for now, we're just going to work with 1,000 pixel width. So that's about this width. Now I'll show you guys how to set the width of the window. But I just want you guys to know that, because you may be wondering, okay, I see that it's aligning center. Does that mean I always have to center all my divs and words in a page that's going to shrink and grow? No. But you don't have to worry about that. But just know that that's how this works. The text align center is going to align the text in the center of its container. If my container was a fixed width amount, then you wouldn't see this effect. But right now, its container is the body, and the body is growing with the width of the page as well. So that's why it's centered no matter where I move it. Okay, so we learned now 3: color, font size, and text align. There's many more we're going to learn. Okay, so we want to have some way of remembering these. Take notes. However you do it, it's just going to be through repetition and practice. Okay, so we have text align center. We just learned that one. All right, we're going to be flipping between rules and selectors. Rules and selectors. All right, so that was a new rule here, and we're going to now use a new type of selector. We're going to use a new type of selector. So let's go ahead and add this H1 back in. Instead, I want to make this an H2. Let's make this an H2. No, actually, I'll leave it in H1. All right, leave it in H1. I'm just going to switch this here to be Happy Tuesday. Okay, so now I just shortened it. I have 2 H1s, and they're both text align center. I want to just make this one text align center. I want the first one, hello world, to stay on the left. and only the second one, Happy Tuesday, to be in the center. How can we do that? Well, we need to apply the CSS selector only to target this one. So let's look at how we can do that. So this is now where we're going to introduce classes. All right, and this is now the class selector. So now the first thing we dealt with was the element selector. Now we're going to talk about the class selector. So let's talk about the class selector. This is a way we can select an element on our page. We have to then create this class here. So let's create this class. And I'm going to create class names based on their uses so far. So right now, I'm going to say class equals centered. So this is going to be to center the text, right? So I'm going to remove this from this H1 because we said we don't want the first one to be centered. So I'm going to take this away from the element selector that's selecting all the H1s on the page. So let's cut this out. And let's target this H1 through this class that I just gave it. So I just gave this one a class. I'm giving it a name, some sort of tag that I can link to my CSS here. So the way I can grab a class is by saying dot and then the name of the class, dot centered. And then I open the curly brackets, indent, and now I can write the rules in here. So I want to paste in here text align center. And now let's take a look. And there we have it. We have the H1 targeting both, this H1 selector, general element selector, targeting both H1s, giving them the color red and both the font size of 50 pixels. So this is targeting the one on line 10 and on line 12. This class selector, dot centered, is specifically targeting just the one class, just the one element with that class on it. That class is written in the opening tag, always in the opening tag. All right, so we have the class here, and we're able to attack or target this class by saying dot centered, opening the brackets, and then applying our rule in here. So before we continue, let's take a quick survey. How well do we think we understand the class selector? How a class selector works, how it's specific rather than general like the element selector.
So I have a question. If it works in terms of like top to bottom, what if you had text align in H1 and in dot centered? Would they both be centered, or would it be like centered is the only one that is?
Good question. Good question. Let's test it. Okay, so if I apply text align center to the element selector, it's going to grab them both. I don't even need this class here. I can comment out this one, this rule, and they're still going to be both centered because this element selector is targeting all the H1s on my page. Doesn't matter which one. It's going to target all the H1s on my page. All right, good question. So we need rules that are going to be specific to be on or attached through classes. All right, so right now we know that class will apply whatever rule we apply to the class selector here to whatever has this class. And now I'm going to show you guys something else. I'm going to take this class and I'm going to copy it and paste it above. So now this class centered is in both the H1 that says hello world and the one that says happy Tuesday. And so if we look here, now they both have text align center applied to them. So by this, we know that we can add multiple class selectors to multiple elements on our HTML page. can add multiple class selectors to multiple HTML elements. Maybe there's, you would have some use for this. We'll show some more practical use for using multiple class selectors on multiple elements. But for now, I just want to show you that it can work that way. Okay, it can work that way. So let's go back to the platform and continue on with the selectors. Here we see just an example, exactly the same as I was showing you. This class selector dot is centered is targeting all the elements with that class dot or is centered. So you don't write the dot in the HTML element, only in the CSS. But the dot is trying to grab that class there. Okay, so we're applying this to all the elements that have that. So only the first one has text align centered. That's what we see here. And then we see dot is red, color red. And that's why this class selector on the bottom element here, that's the only one that's red. So that's what we're seeing. Now we have another type of selector. In addition to class, we have an ID. Okay, we also introduced this in the slide. This is now the third one we're going to introduce. ID, we're going to go over star selector tomorrow, or actually in a couple days, not tomorrow. Let's look at ID selector. How is an ID selector different than the element and class selector? All right, sometimes there's only needs to be one given element that has a specific rule, okay? And that's what ID for. ID will supersede classes, right? If you have, for example, this one here to say, let's make Happy Tuesday have two classes. One is going to be class equals red and an ID that equals blue. Okay, so let's take away this rule for all of the H1s and let's apply dot class selector and make color red. And let's make an ID. Let's grab the ID. How can we grab an ID? The way to target an ID is by writing the pound or hash symbol, hashtag, and then the name of the ID. So blue, open the curly brackets, and then write the color blue. Right, so this hashtag blue, this is targeting this ID blue. So if I have an H1 where I have,
Sorry, Josh, real quick. Shouldn't your dot class be dot red on your CSS?
oh yes, you're right. Sorry, I'm like explaining it and then writing.
Sorry.
No, perfect. No, I appreciate that. So thank you. So we have class to be, it should be dot red exactly as was said there. So we have dot red in the color red and then hashtag blue for the ID blue. Yeah, I meant to write it red, but I said class because I'm saying class out loud. All right, so here we are. Let's see which one will apply. Will it be red or blue? What do you guys think? Will this H1 be red or blue? I gave you guys the answer.
Blue.
Blue.
Yes, it's going to be blue. It's blue. So there we are. We know now an ID selector will override a class selector's rules. So an ID selector is powerful. And we can only have one ID per element in our HTML page. So if I copy this ID blue and I paste it here, what will happen is that they're both blue. But if I copy this HTML and run this into the HTML checker, okay, if I paste it in here, we'll get an error, duplicate ID. So be careful with this. Be careful with using more than one ID with the same name on more than one element on your HTML page, because you'll get marked down on the test for this. You have to run your HTML through an HTML checker for your test. And this is, if you use more than one ID on more than one element with the same name, you'll create this error on your HTML checker. So it'll still work, but it's not ideal. So don't do that, right? Don't use multiple IDs. You can use multiple classes, but not multiple IDs. All right, so let's take a quick poll. How well do we feel like we understand IDs? All right, looking good. Okay. Are we going to go over this today? Yeah, we will go over this today. I said we'll go over it tomorrow. We'll go more in depth into the wildcard selector in a couple days. We'll just briefly introduce what you can do with it today, and then we'll go over what it's primarily used for in a bit. So this one here, this one is the star selector, or the wildcard selector. This will select everything. This will select everything on the page. So let's put this to use. And we see here what's being applied is outline 1 pixel solid red. Okay, so that will add a 1 pixel solid red outline to everything. So let's see what this looks like. This is going to apply to everything. And so I want to put it at the top. When I put it at the top, you're starting with this all selector. And so let's see what this looks like now. So now everything has a red outline. And that's because that star selector grabbed everything. Okay, so that's how the wildcard or star selector works. What else do we want to go over? We're nearing the end. Let me take a look at our schedule. This afternoon, we're going to go over box models, so we'll stop right before we get to the box model. So we've gone over the class, ID, element selector. We also want to learn the descendant selector, and direct descendant selector. Okay, the descendant selector and direct descendant selector. So yesterday we learned about how each element here has a hierarchy. So this element that I'm highlighting right now on line 10, because it is within the body element, the body element is the parent of this H1 element. The body element is the parent of this H1 element because it is wrapping it. It's encapsulating this H1 element. So everything that is encapsulated by something else is its child. Okay, but we also have a system of direct descendants versus just descendants. Right? We talked a little bit about this yesterday. So in order to show this, I'm going to copy this from well, I'm not going to copy. I'm going to create my own. So let's go ahead and indent here a little bit. I'm going to create a div. So now I have a div, and inside this div, I'm going to create 3 p tags. So p times 3, and I'm going to type some like lorem here, And on this one as well. And on this one as well. So now I have 3 p tags. Let's add a break between each one, just so I can see some separation. All right, and that's what we have there. I'm going to take away this outline because I don't need to see this right now. All right, so here are my 3 p tags. I want to select these p tags, but as a descendant of this div. As a descendant of this div. So let's do that now using the descendant selector. The way to use a descendant selector is by naming the parent and then naming the child. Naming the parent and then naming the child right after. You add a space, the child's name, and then you open the brackets. So let's do this. So I will grab, I only have one div on my page, so I'm just going to use the general element selector. I'm going to say div, and then I want to access my divs p tags. So I'm going to say grab all the p tags that are descendants of divs and make them color red. So let's take a look at this. Now all my p tags that are descendants of divs have the color red. If I write my p tag outside of this div, if I write a p tag here and I say lorem here, you'll see this one doesn't have the red color applied to it because this p tag is not a descendant of a div. So we say all the p tags that are descendant of divs by saying div space p, open up the brackets, color red. That's how we're applying color red to all the p tags that are only the ones that are descendants of divs. Okay, so that is the descendant selector. Now we can see how that works. And I want to see how well this is understood. So how well do we understand the descendant selector now? Okay. We're going to move from this to the direct descendant selector, the direct descendant selector. So the direct descendant selector is very similar, just slightly different. This one, we see now the caret symbol looks like the greater than sign, right? When we apply this direct descendant symbol, when selecting a descendant, we are saying only the direct descendant should have this applied, this rule applied. So let's go ahead and apply that direct descendant selector. And let's look at our page and we see no difference. The reason is all these p tags are direct descendants of this div. All the p tags are direct descendants of this div. So this is not really making much of a difference. In order to see the difference, we need to let's create a p tag that is a grandchild of this one here. So let's say I want, actually, you know what? Let's change this up a little bit. I'm going to give this div a class name. I'm going to give this div a class name. So I'm going to say class parent. Okay. So we're going to change this from div to dot parent. Okay, and there we are, no difference. So we're still where we were. And now we want to add a div in here inside this div parent. And I'm going to call this one class child, just so you guys can see here, this div is a child of this parent. But when this child has its own p tag, let's see. If a child has its own p tag, let's type lorem here. We can also see this one is black. All right, so I'm going to comment out the one that's outside of our div. We don't need to see this anymore in line 12. I'm going to comment this out so that we know which one is which. So it's no longer there. Everything, every p tag now is within this parent element with the class parent. This class parent has how many direct descendants? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 direct descendants. And one of its descendants, this div class child, has another descendant. So this one is not a direct descendant. This one is not a direct descendant of the parent. This is a child of the child. So only direct descendants get the color red when we see this caret symbol. Okay, so that's what the direct descendant symbol is, or selector is doing. It's selecting only the direct descendants of that class parent that are p tags. Even though this one is a p tag and it's within the child that's within this parent, it's not going to get the color red because only direct descendants. Okay, only children, no grandchildren. Right, so if I delete this caret symbol, they go back to all red because the descendant selector says it doesn't matter if you're a child or grandchild, you will get this rule applied to you. Direct descendant says, nope, only my direct children, grandchildren don't matter to me. All right, so let's take one more survey. How well do we understand the difference between the direct descendant and descendant selector? Okay. The last thing I want to highlight while I have you guys is this selectors game. Okay. This isn't an assignment, but this will help you practice selecting elements on a page, and they've made this a game, so it's a lot more interesting than tinkering on your own. But this is definitely a, how come it won't game source CSS diner? Is this link no longer working? Let me see if it works here. Play CSS diner. There we are. Okay, here we are. So we need to type in a CSS selector for let's go to level 1. How about that? Okay. So here's our HTML on the right. We have div class table and we have 2 plates. All right, we have a plate inside the table. These are children of the table. So type in a CSS selector. So select the plates. That's what we're supposed to do. So we'll say we want to grab all the plates. So we'll use the element selector. This will grab all the elements with this name. So plate. If I press enter, then I go to level 2. Select the bento boxes. All right, so which one is a bento box? This one's a bento box. This one's a bento box. Use the element selector for bento. There's no, element in HTML that's bento, but this is going to help you practice differentiating between getting elements, classes. So let's get the bentos. And now we want to get the fancy plate. So this one, which one's a fancy plate? That one's a fancy plate. So we see here, this one has an ID of fancy. So what do we use to grab IDs? Hashtag symbol, right? Hashtag, and then what's the name of the ID? Fancy. So we'll say ID fancy, enter. And then we move on. So here's a fun game you guys can play to practice between selectors. All right. So what we want to practice now that we opened the breakout groups is styling. Here's a practice assignment called styling. Let's take a look. Right. So we have a new rule, background color. Now we can apply. So we have color, background color, text align, text decoration, font style, and we're going to be able to affect our H1s and 2s and 3s. So we'll start with this. We'll move to button up. Okay. Then we're going to be creating buttons, styling our buttons, learning different CSS rules that we can apply to our buttons. And then we have plotting our blocks. This is going to be something that we'll learn how to do. We'll understand how to do this better after this afternoon's lecture. So this afternoon, we'll be working on the box model and learning about inline block. So let's get our assignments done. All right. By the end of the day, we have styling, button up, and plotting our blocks. That's our goals. And then after our lecture this afternoon, we're going to group up again and work on some fun group activities. Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask you guys, do you have any questions now related to anything in the lecture? CSS, selectors, any of the rules that I've used so far. There's so many I can't introduce them all in one lecture. You're going to have to slowly introduce them to yourselves. And the more you practice them, the more you'll remember them. Okay, so I can only introduce a little bit at a time or else it'll be too much information at once. Cool. Well, if we have no questions, then I'll go ahead and end the lecture, close the recording.